So just to introduce myself, I probably know most of you know from different things through the Council of Canadians, but so my name is Joey Hartman, and I am on the national board as the recording secretary for the council. And I've been on the board now for, in the summer, it'll be 2 years. I was very involved with the task force, the Good Governance Task Force, that had a special meeting culminating in the adoption of 33 recommendations for changes to the Constitution and bylaws and some policy matters. And I come to this work having spent 40 years in the labor movement and retired 2 years ago as the president of the Vancouver and District Labor Council. And through that work have had a lot of opportunities to meet with politicians and to participate in lobbies that were simply two people and one politician in an office, up to having large, well-organized lobby days where a number of us would go together to the provincial legislature. I've never participated in a lobby day on Capitol Hill in Ottawa, but it would be the same kind of a thing. So that's it to introduce and welcome. And I've been asked to AJ if she could monitor the chat box and see if there's anything that I'm not noticing, because I'm not seeing the screen now for that. So AJ, I'm going to count on you to jump in.
Yep,
so
I got it.
Okay, so just a quick outline of what I intend to cover is what do we mean by lobbying and why do we do it? 3, how does it fit into our campaigns? 4, this is the opportunity to hear from you about some experiences that you may have had doing lobbying. 5, framing the issue that you're going to talk to politicians about and what is your ask. 6, building support. 7, identifying who to meet with, who should attend the meeting, and how to prepare for it. 8, the art of lobbying, the nuances essentially, what do you expect when you get there and how to conduct it. 9 is a quick checklist, which will recap some of the materials that is in the larger document. And 10 is 3 different tools that I'm providing to you that I've adopted from other places to help you do a power analysis. Who should you meet with? What are you going to be knowing about them by the time you get there? And then opportunity at the end for some Q&A. So if there's any questions, this would be just in terms of that process, but we wrap up at 4:30 is the plan. So starting with, what do we mean by lobbying? This is the original lobbying, which is that people hung out in the lobby of the British House of Commons waiting for politicians to break from session and say, you know, can I have your ear? Can I have a moment of your time? And so that's where the term comes from, literally being in the lobby. And here's one definition, that it is the process through which individuals and groups articulate their interests to federal, provincial, or municipal governments in order to influence public policy or group government decision-making. So we're trying to have an impact on a decision or outcome of what government is doing. And in many cases, and this is the question that came up before we even started right at the top, is why should we even be doing this? Because we know that we are outnumbered by paid third parties who communicate on their behalf. So the actual registered lobbyists who are very strongly backed by big money. So it's really kind of the response that first happened in terms of regulation of lobbying happened in the United States when it was exposed just how corrupt it had become. And so there are, in fact, a set of laws and regulations around registered lobbyists. That's not us. We are a different kind of lobbying. So the original, and what's now totally illegal, that got totally corrupt, was the special interest group. Of course, they call us that, but we're citizens. So everybody, I guess, has a special interest, but this would be, you know, oil and gas, for example, who in the old days would go straight to the politicians and use their finances and their political influence to get what they wanted. The regulations put a lobbyist in the center of that relationship, and presumably they still can't pay cash, but there is a sense of favoritism, favors that get passed along. So That's a legal form of lobbying that continues to exist in a big way. I'm just going to keep going until I hear that maybe somebody has a question that AJ is going to interrupt. So the way this tends to be looked at is that we have, big business, politicians, elected politicians who meet regularly, that there's an exchange of favor, that there's a lot of influence of big money, and you're either in that game or you're out. And if you're out, the sense that many of us have is that that puts us outside altogether, 100%. The only place that we can exercise our voices in the streets. And this offers us something in the middle. And that's why we lobby. We have an opportunity through our lobbying to get us as the public moving our issues forward by taking off that cloak of secrecy, essentially, having our voices also in the room with the politicians, and to make sure that they also are reminded about their accountability to us. And so rather than be outsiders to this process, it brings us into the room in a way that we are heard. And when I talk to people who are in elected positions, they say that they're actually very receptive, and their experience is that all political stripes are very receptive to hearing the voices of citizens, because it does in fact help to keep them informed of the issues. It's stuff that they won't otherwise know in many cases, and it's a very legitimate form of political work and governance. And if we don't take advantage of it, it means that we are always going to be on the outside. We're always just going to be the demonstrations in the streets. And I want to say that that's also totally legitimate and important to moving our democracy forward, that protest is a form of democracy in action, but this is also a legitimate form. And I think that when we don't use it, we are not taking advantage of the full spectrum of opportunity that's available to us. It's a form of advocacy. It's a way of taking our large campaigns and narrowing it down to specific questions and issues and asks. It's a way of holding our politicians accountable in between elections. This is the relationship that we have with politicians when it's not a campaign period for a political election. And it also really brings the voice of our activists forward into the room and helps them to learn how to be politically active, because it's such a surprise to people that they actually do have access to elected politicians, people who will sit down and listen to them, not necessarily carry forward on the things that they've asked for, what they believe in, but to have a conversation. It's also, in terms of the work of the Council of Canadians, important to remember that we are expressly nonpartisan. And I think that often there's confusion between nonpartisan and non-political. So nonpartisan means that we are not associated with any political party. We don't speak for any political party, and we don't have a direct affiliation. There are, of course, politicians who more reflect the values that we hold as the Council of Canadians and are more aligned with the issues that we care about in the way that we care about them. But not being nonpartisan doesn't mean not being political. We as the Council of Canadians are a very political organization, and everything that we work on and work towards has a political association. I come out of the camp of believing that the personal is political, and that all of the things that happen to me, what surrounds me in my life, has a political connotation. If I have a library in my community, is there a bus stop anywhere near where I live? Is there safe food to eat and water to drink? All of those things are decisions that our politicians at one level of government or another to either do something or choose not to do something. So the fact that we have boil water alerts in Indigenous communities across the country is an example of politicians having not had the political will to act. And the fact that we have all sorts of things going on in the COVID crisis is an example of politicians choosing to act and step forward. And that's the place that our voices can really make a big difference. I'll just pause and see if anybody wants to ask any questions at this stage.
Okay. If you have any questions, folks, they're not able to just unmute on this function, so they would have to pop it.
Put up a hand.
Yeah, okay. I don't see where that hand raise function is. Maybe that's something you see on your attendee side.
When you do,
there it is. Okay,
people,
so we've got one attendee with a hand raise. I just have to find out who it is.
And so, can you let her in? It's Brenda Stewart, I think.
I think that maybe she was just doing that to try it out or to show us that it is working. So yeah, if any of you have a question, you can raise your hand. I think that's, I'm assuming, a button that's apparent on your side, or you can pop it into the chat box or the Q&A box.
So what you do is you open the participants section. It says participants, click on that, and then there's a place for your hand to show.
I see that part, just not how they do it on their end.
Okay. So we do want decision makers, influencers, and legislators to know our views and to support our positions and to exercise the authority that they have as elected representatives to make progressive change. And our role is to point out to them what that means, and also to create a dynamic where two things happen, and I'll come back to this. We want to create an environment where the parade that we create is the one that they want to be running in front of. So it has to feel good for them. And we also want them to know that if they don't go along with what we have lobbied around, that there are consequences, and hopefully those are ones that they feel nervous about, that they have a sense that if they don't work with us, that there is a consequence to their reluctance to do so. So again, this is the outside, you know, people who just feel like there's no voice for us in the political dialogue, feel closed out from it. And this is an anonymous mask, which was pretty popular for a while, but this is the cynical view, which is got some legitimacy, there's no doubt about it. But part of our role is to counter that by another form of organizing, and that's what we do. That's the grassroots lobbying and organizing that we do in the council and many of the other organizations that folks are involved with at civil society levels. And so the council, being a national nonprofit organization, uses many tools to advance our vision for a strong commons. And over the 35 years of our existence, we've provided credible analysis to Canadians on a variety of issues. And it's our work to speak to our shared values. So we've gone through periods, obviously, of relative strength and weaknesses over those 35 years. I would say that when we are strongest is when we have a very strong grassroots activist base of people across the country who are not just reading about the issues that we are working on at the council, but who are also going out, participating in rallies and events, community events, all of that kind of stuff, but also taking the opportunity to take the information and take it to the politicians that are elected in their communities. So that's when they are most listening to us, and they talk to each other and they find out who else is being lobbied in their own community. So we work in solidarity and collaboration with others sometimes. So we may be working with other organizations who, so climate justice would be an example, and put our voices together to amplify and have a broader impact. We could participate in protests and marches and rallies and other nonviolent direct action, and that gives a visual demonstration to our activists and to our numbers, to the broader community. But I have to say that even when we have poured into the streets, and in some countries, you know, we've seen this in Paris and London and Spain, where people have poured into the streets in millions and still had the politicians completely ignore them. And that's, I think, because the strategy has to include not only the visualization of people in the streets and the sense of mass protest, but also to have these more strategic conversations that take place sometimes in the office of an elected politician or in their constituency office. But these are equally important tools that we have available to us. And we have to use them in a way that isn't at cross purposes, because if we're choosing to do direct action on an issue, we have to make sure that we're also still able to get access into the meeting. And the opportunity is there then to say, if you don't deal with us, you deal with them. And that means the people out on the streets. So the two are complementary and can be worked together, but it's a bit of a tricky thing to do it well.
Joey, there are a couple questions in the question box when you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you just share them with me and we'll stop now.
Okay, the first one is from Brenda Stewart, and she's saying, are we lobbying anytime we go in as an individual or a group to a politician and ask them to do something?
I would call that a form of lobbying, yeah. I would say that you're more effective if you're doing it as part of a larger campaign, but yes, it's called lobbying, it's community lobbying.
Okay, great. And the next question is from Mary Cowper-Smith, and she is saying, apart from losing our vote at the next election, what might be the negative consequences for politicians who don't do what we ask?
Well, that's the big one. Of course, they want your vote, but they also want to feel like they're well respected in their community, especially your own MPs, your own MLAs, I guess in Ontario it's MPPs, your council members. And the time that they spend between elections is also a really important time for them to feel like they can be supported and are representative of the interests of their constituent base. So, you know, obviously being reelected is the big one, but it's also about having a good relationship with their community in between elections. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give for the moment. Was there any other questions right now?
Not that I see right now, but folks, feel free to just keep popping them into the chat box or the Q&A.
Okay, thanks. So this is a form of advocacy. Lobbying and advocacy are pretty much the same thing in terms of putting forward a position. And so it's done as part of a bigger campaign. We hope that it gets media attention in a good way, and that we also often work in coalition with other organizations to bring issues of common ground, common concern together. So I think I've already pretty much covered how it fits into our campaigns, except to say that something like the Blue Community campaign that the Council of Canadians, the lobbying is a really critical part of that, because what we're asking is for municipalities to decide to become a blue community, and you can only do that by sitting down with your council members and giving them reason to understand the issue, how it's important to them, what the opportunities are for them, to be showing very concrete steps on the climate emergency, which people are now taking very seriously. And so that's just one example of where you can't have a successful campaign without also having a piece of that being the lobbying work that needs to go with it. So we try to, all across the country in our small communities, take on those big interests by organizing ourselves in all of our little communities, and our combined voices being bigger than the singular voices of one paid lobbyist. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we participate in the streets as active citizens. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's anybody who's on the line who's ever been in a lobby. It sounded like somebody had done a one-on-one with their politician. And yeah, I do call that a lobby. It's just, the word has such a negative connotation. I think it might be useful for us to reclaim it, because it's actually a very effective tool for us. Is there anybody who'd like to share that they've done some lobbying themselves?
Just put your hand up if you would like to share, and then I can make it so you can talk. Okay, Penny. There you go. And Penny, I think if you just unmute.
Okay, yeah.
Great.
Before one of the federal elections, the council had a coordinated campaign to go to MPs on a number of health issues. So we went to see a couple of us, our local MP, sat down and had a kind of unproductive meeting, as we found, although she was, in fact, I think the deputy at that point, she knew very little about what was happening with health issues, because these would all be announced when they came out with their platform. So we were prepared for the meeting. She wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when we went to lobby, one of the another party in opposition found somebody very, very receptive who agreed with everything we said. So it was talking to the converted in one case, not having much success with the others. But at least we felt she was told what a lot of people were concerned about, and it felt, if that was happening across the country, hopefully these politicians were talking to each other, as Joey just said, and getting the message.
Right. Thanks, Penny. Anybody else want to share an experience? So I'm going to assume that's a no.
I'm not seeing anyone. No.
Okay.
No.
So I'll pick up this next question and answer then from Amanda, who says, how do you think we can help politicians bring campaigns and keep the campaigns on the table and active on the agendas? And I think this is an example. We have a Nestle water bottle ban in our municipality, which isn't moving much within our city, I guess. And how do we help? And so that is part of the larger campaign. And it's like all of the campaigns that we do, I would say that we're using a range of tools available to us, including talking to our neighbors, talking to managers in the stores that sell the bottled water from Nestle. What choices are they making? Of course, most of us would like not to see bottled water at all. But I have to say that it's not, we can't do a lobby meeting and think that, okay, we've done it, that's our work is done. But it also can be kind of exasperating when you don't feel like they've paid any attention. It can be frustrating if it just doesn't feel like there's any momentum. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how we build support for our campaigns and how we build that parade for those politicians to want to be in front of. Because when they feel like they're going to get accolades and respect for having taken the right position, they're going to be a lot more happy to be visible in their support. And I think sometimes too, we try and take on too much, and it just makes it feel overwhelming. And it's important for us to narrow our particular issue and our ask when we have those meetings, so that it is something that's achievable with that individual, and that we make sure we take our issue to the right place. So I think I'm going to keep going and hope that the other material covers that for you, and if not, come back to it at the end of the Q&A. So the framing of the issue and the ask is really very important. So if you're dealing with something that the council has developed as a campaign issue, a lot of the work has been done for you, because you can be confident that there is well-researched and credible materials on the council website and through your regional staff person to help identify what is the issue that the council is working on that might resonate in your community and with your local politician. And I'm going to take an assumption here that most of the folks on the call, if you're doing lobbying, it's going to be either with the MPs for your community, the elected representative for your constituency, or an MLA or MPP, again, for your constituency or community, and city council. So part of the first thing that you need to do is think about what is the issue and which level of government has the mandate. So if it's about keeping your library open, that's going to be your city council. You're not going to go to the province asking them to keep your library open. If it's about bottling water, that's a provincial jurisdiction. If it's about a national pharmacare plan, that's going to be a national issue. But I will say too that more and more what we're seeing is municipal governments particularly choosing to take a stand and help build momentum across the country on issues that would traditionally be seen outside of their scope of jurisdiction. And so back in 1982, I think it was, the city of Vancouver declared itself a nuclear-free zone. And to much derision from the mainstream media and politicians who said, you know, that's just ridiculous. Who in their right mind would think that a city has the ability to influence the international war machine, the whole sense of arms buildup, the Cold War, all of that stuff. And yet it gained international attention. It helped advance the discussion around the issue. And those signs are still there today to declare, you know, when you enter into Vancouver, you can see signs that say this is a nuclear-free zone. And so the first thing you need to do is to decide your issue. And then you have to figure out, is it going to be a municipal, provincial, territorial, or a national issue? And who do you then go to? That'll help you decide how that goes. The ask specifically is got to be a small piece of this. So you have to have both sort of your eyes on the prize. What is the big thing that we're looking to change? And then what is the really manageable bite-sized piece of this that we can work on right now? And if you make it too big, you kind of self-defeat yourself, because the politician, when you meet with them, is going to just say, you know, what do you expect me to do on this? There's no way you can expect me to be taking on this really huge issue. So you have to think about what's the big thing. I don't know if you can see it, but the caption, can you see the caption?
Yeah, you can see it.
I've got it blocked off on mine. So the idea is that, you know, you have to take a really big thing that you're looking for and take what is the bite-sized piece of it that will work for you in this moment, clear and achievable. And then, so for example, the Blue community, well, that's all about recognizing water as a fundamental, water and sanitation as fundamental human rights, and then taking steps at the municipal level to do that. So the ask is pass a resolution. So if this isn't a Council of Canadians campaign that you're working on, but one that is involving something else in your community, you're going to have to meet with people and figure out how you narrow down the big question into something achievable to ask for when you actually get that meeting. And even for those campaigns to the Council of Canadians that have a clearly delineated ask, it's important to think about, as a chapter or a group of activists, what is it that we specifically are going to do to tailor this ask to our community? How does it fit into our context and the politician that we're meeting with? And then you need to build some support. So this is about building that parade that your politician wants to be at the front of the line. And so some of the ways that you can do this is, if you have a labor council in your community, you could ask them to pass a resolution so that you can point to that later. You can provide the wording of the resolution and the specifics that you'd like to have included. You can have letters to the editor, op-eds, those are opinion editorials. It's actually always, it's called that because it's on the opposite side of the editorial page in the newspapers traditionally. You can have visibility at community events and rallies. So, you know, is there a Labor Day event? Is there a May Day? Is there a community fair? All of those places are opportunities for you to have a table and to help persuade your community that this is an important issue. You can have letters to other politicians. So you might have decided who you're going to lobby, but then you could also reach out to the other politicians who share space with them. Open letters and petitions, emails and letters of support from other influential organizations are all ways that you can reach out and build a sense of support that when you do meet with the politician, or as a follow-up, what you're doing is expressing to them that it's not just you that's saying these things, that you're part of a larger voice. And who are you going to lobby? Well, the first thing we talked about was how you need to choose which level of government. And I've put up the leaders of all of the federal political parties. You're not going to get meetings with them. It's only, sort of the leaders of the highest level of other organizations who are going to get those meetings in almost every case. There may be a couple of exceptions in here, unless they happen to be your MP. So that's perhaps an opportunity. But you might see them at events and you have an opportunity to, in an informal way, this would be very informal lobbying, but an opportunity that you wouldn't want to let pass is just to go up, shake their hand. Well, in the old days, we would shake their hand and say, hey, I'm with the Council of Canadians and it's nice to meet you. And let me tell you about something we're working on right now. This is the City Council of Vancouver. So this is who we lobbied recently to become a blue community. And if there's time, I'll talk more about how we did that later. But so this is at the municipal level. But most likely what you're going to be doing as a lobbyist is have a few people, you and at least one other, go to City Hall or in a constituency office in your community and meet with the politician. They very likely have one of their assistants with them, taking notes and being prepared to make, follow-up notes for the other things that might have to come out of that meeting. But this is pretty typical of what you would expect if you've not done this before. And who should you be taking with you? Well, part of it depends on what you're doing. So if this is a group who's going to in Ottawa to the capital and who is got 5 people ready to go and talk to a couple of politicians. Here's one politician meeting with a group of people who obviously have concern that they're bringing forward, and they've gotten themselves organized. You can see they've brought some handouts, taking notes on the computer, and having an intense conversation about this. So, so you're going to size your group. If you're meeting with one person, you would take no more than 3, I would say. Typically, the 4 is a lot. You'd want to kind of scale the size of how many people you take to match up with how many politicians you're meeting with. I would say too that if you have a lobby where you're all going to your provincial capital as part of a larger group, you might be doing this with one of your coalitions. You could have maybe 20 or 30 of you who are going, and you're going to meet with, break up and meet with a number of politicians over the course of the day in 2s and 3s, or potentially I've done ones where we've gone to Victoria, the British Columbia capital, with a group of 25 or 30 of us, and what we did was met with as many representatives of each political party separately. So we had one meeting with the NDP, one meeting with the Green Party, and another meeting with the Liberals, because those were the 3 elected parties at the time, and do it that way. So you're going to structure it based on what who you're meeting with, how many people you're meeting with, and what your issue is. What I think is very, very important, though, is that always, if at all possible, ensure that at least one of you is a direct constituent of the politicians you're meeting with. So you may actually decide that you'd rather meet with somebody in their, if it's a member of parliament, you might rather meet with them when they're home in their constituency, and make sure that at least one of those people who's in the meeting is somebody who is a direct, has the opportunity to vote for that individual, which goes back to the question about the consequence. You want them to know that you're part of the community who votes for them or has the opportunity, and that they need to be paying attention to that. In terms of preparation, we do not want to totally overload them when we get there. So what you're going to do is prepare a kit that you're going to leave with them. And typically you're going to have a pocket folder that has a 2-pager with bullet points on your issue. Perhaps on that page or a separate page, something that's specific to the ask or the resolution that you're asking them to consider supporting. And what I always like to do is have something that would say, we are here representing the Council of Canadians. The Council's vision is, and then a short sentence or two, and then a list of the names and phone number, contact emails for the people that they met with, so that they have a sense of who's in the room, because it's too hard for them to remember this as well. And it means that they can just glance down at it as you're talking, and they remember your name more readily as a result of that. So you don't want to do this, you do want to do this. The other thing that's important for the preparation, obviously, is getting the meeting. And again, depends on where you think you're going to meet. So if it's in a constituency office, when they're in their own ridings, then you're going to call the constituency office and ask for their schedule and say that you'd like to set up a meeting. You're typically going to get at best 30 minutes, and you'll probably be told it could be quite some time before they'll be available to meet with you. But they do set days aside to meet with their constituents, and they're always going to give priority to a constituent over somebody who's a lobby from outside of the constituency. So that's another good reason to have somebody who's a voting member participate as one of your people. It's also become more and more common for them to require you to fill out a form asking for the opportunity to meet, and the constituency assistant or staff person will provide that to you. They'll ask you who you are, what organization, if any, you are representing, what the main issue is that you're coming to talk about, and your contact information. And it varies slightly depending on who the politician is, but that's generally it. So if you are leading towards a particular date, so for example, today is Earth Day, if your issue was something that you wanted to try and get out ahead of that, so that you could do some campaign work to connect the dots on those issues, then you need to really think back about, 4 months from earlier, that you start asking for that meeting and trying to figure out what the availability is. So here's just some things in terms of what to expect when you get into the meeting. And when you get the handout, you'll see that there's more detail on all of this. But the document I'm going to give you also gives you some information about who you can reach and how to set up those meetings. The art of effective lobbying is that 30 minutes can go very, very quickly. And so you want to make really good use of the time. You're going to make sure that in anticipation, you've already decided who's going to do the speaking, who's going to be the note taker, and possibly who's going to be the camera person, because you want to leave this meeting with a photograph that you can use for your communications work later. But it's very easy to get sidetracked. As soon as you walk in the door and they find out that one of your folks especially is a constituent, they're going to want to know where they live, which restaurant in the community they like best, what activities they're involved with, and the next thing you know, you could have all of your time has been taken up. So you can have some niceties when you walk in the door, but really fast you want to get to, something to the effect of, well, we understand we have 30 minutes and we have some really important issues to talk to you about. And so that's all very interesting. Thank you very much. Let's now turn to the issue that we came to talk to you about. So be very thoughtful about not dropping into shorthand talk or assuming that they know what you're talking about. So say everything out in full, even if you think it's unnecessary. So when we say the council, you have to at least once say the Council of Canadians. We have all of this vernacular that we tend to use that we think people understand, and it's really important not to presume that they know your issue or the acronyms and shorthand that you use. You should have anticipated which questions they're likely to ask, and if you've paid attention to the political slants that they've taken on this issue previously or other issues that may have some similarity, then you're going to be able to kind of think about in advance, what are they likely to challenge you with? What are they likely to want to know more about? But because you've reduced your paper that you're leaving with them to 2 pages, You can follow up with more materials, but you have to be very thoughtful about not overwhelming them. They'll just glaze over. It's important for you to be pleasant and collegial. Well, not necessarily collegial. You have to be pleasant. This is not a time to make enemies. You need to leave some time for your discussions. So I've laid out a timeline in the document that suggests that you spend about 5 minutes saying the settling in niceties. You spend about 10 minutes making your presentation, and the rest of your time should be for a back and forth, because it's what you're really trying to do here is build up a relationship. And don't make the mistake of just assuming that because they ran as a conservative or a political party that is more on the right side of the spectrum, that they totally disagree with your issue. They will probably be voting party line. They probably don't have much choice, but you are looking for common ground, and part of the research that you do about them in advance will help you with that. But there are unlikely allies. So for example, in Vancouver, some years ago, there was a group of families who lived in a very affluent area who organized themselves into a group on working on behalf of and in support of safe injection sites, because their kids too were dying of drug overdoses. And so there would have been a lot of ease to make an assumption that those people are wealthy. They wouldn't probably support this kind of an issue, and yet they did because of their own direct experience. And there's also some politicians who spent the early years of their life in abject poverty and may have more sympathy than you might expect on some of the issues that we would bring forward. I'm just picking up another message here. Can you describe what lobbying looks like now, given the current COVID restrictions against in-person meetings? I don't think there's any lobbying happening right now in the nature that I'm describing. I expect that part of that is because the politicians are totally absorbed with figuring out what they're doing about it as well. But I think that as we move forward, if this becomes more normalized as a way of communicating, that I anticipate we will start to see Zoom meetings as a lobbying tool, and other ways of not sitting down face to face, but through these other kinds of opportunities. And I think that that's actually making it more accessible. And as we become more comfortable with it as a way of communicating, I think that we're going to see more of that. But I did have that question as I was preparing for this, and I didn't really have a good answer for it. The next question is, when creating a relationship, such as during the last part of the interview, how can we prevent the politician from using this space to dominate the conversation and even distracting everyone from the issue at hand? And it's hard. They're more likely to take up your time before you get a chance to make your presentation and keep you from making it than afterwards. If you feel like you've really been heard, then I wouldn't worry too much. You've achieved most of what you've gone in for. And again, part of it is about making a relationship. And if part of that relationship is listening to them go on a little bit long on stuff that you think is irrelevant, you've still got a chance to, next time you meet with them, pick up on that. You're also perhaps going to gain some knowledge about the things that they care about, and that might help you develop the next approach or to continue on building a relationship with them. So hope that's enough of an answer. And I think that's all I have there for questions. So next is follow-up. So as soon as you come out of your meeting, well, first of all, before you go in to meet with them, meet at a coffee shop or somewhere nearby, so that people are going to trickle in and arrive at different times, especially if you've got more than 2 or 3 people as part of your lobby. So it's best to meet somewhere else. Just make sure everybody feels like they're settled, they know what their issue is. There's a chance to just catch your breath collectively and then go together to the office or wherever it is you're going to meet with them. And then make sure that you're not late. They've given you the gift of their time, and you need to be really respectful of that, and it's not going to make a good impression. Also, just be aware that wherever you meet, if you're meeting at a coffee shop next to their constituency office, for example, you have no idea. You may recognize them, but you're not going to recognize their assistant. And if you're having people in your preparation say, pretty unfortunate or insulting things about the politician, you can bet that that's going to get back to them before you even get yourself in the door. So it's really important to remember that there are ears everywhere. And once you go into the waiting area, there will also be a staff person there who can hear what you say. And if you are rude to that person or anything less than friendly, again, the politician that you're trying to persuade will hear about that, and it'll it'll tarnish your opportunity to make a good impression and be heard. The meeting we've already talked about a little bit. The follow-up, so you then, when you leave, you will regroup with people, even if it's on the sidewalk, have a quick debrief. Whoever did the report, note-taking will submit a report. Ideally, these reports in the council would be sent into the Ottawa office so that they can get a sense of the pulse across the country. You're going to decide the next steps. Do we need another meeting? Who are we meeting with next? Those kinds of things. And be sure to send a thank you, even if it's just a quick email afterwards saying thank you for your time. And I would say, even if they totally dismissed you, they did give you the gift of their time, and that's a pretty valuable thing. So I would always just send something to, even if I couldn't find anything to say complimentary, I would send something saying thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. There's a couple more questions. Can you describe what, okay, I've answered that. Is there something new I'm not seeing here?
You got to both those questions, right?
Okay, yes, thanks.
The COVID one, and then the first one about bringing campaigns and keeping campaigns on the table, right?
Right.
Okay, great.
Okay, so that kind of covers that list. Now, what I wanted to do is just maybe spend a few more minutes describing the day of the meeting. So these are, again, going to be in the notes that I'm sending to you. But on the day, I think, this may sound shallow, but I think how you dress is important. It does make a first impression. And if you have on your gardening clothes or the things that you wear when you're doing painting and woodwork, then you're going to send the message to them that this really isn't all that important to you. I'm not suggesting that you wear your best clothes, but something that is casual, but what my mother would call nice looking. And it just makes it that you don't have a distraction because of that. You're going to bring your group together about half an hour to 60 minutes in advance, somewhere else, reviewing your plan, and then go together to the meeting. And as I say, be very polite to the reception person and the political staff. Those people can block you from ever getting access again, but they can also help facilitate things and make sure that the politician receives the information that you want them to in a timely way. The meeting at most is going to be about 30 minutes. I have had them stretch. Sometimes I've been told I'll get 30 minutes, but then it turned into an hour. But don't expect that. And in fact, be prepared for the fact that it might be truncated unexpectedly, and you still need to get your message out as quickly as you can. You would start with about 5 minutes of introductions, and I normally will get the people at the table who've come with me to all introduce themselves and what their role is, and to briefly describe the council's missions, goals, and objectives. 10 minutes to present your issue and make your ask, and 10 minutes to discuss, clarify, and answer the questions that they might have. And then a wrap up, reiterate their commitment to you, and what you're doing is not just saying, here's the thing that we're here to talk about, and we'd like you to think about it. Thank you very much. It's also really valuable to ask for a commitment from something that they can do that is an action on their part. So it's not just to support you, but to do something like, if it's somebody from the Conservative Party, for example, you might say, look, we acknowledge that your party has taken a viewpoint on this issue that is quite different than the one we're presenting to you. but we're making a very specific request here that you do X. Would you at least raise this in caucus and tell us what the reaction is? Which isn't asking for them to make a commitment that they're going to go your way, but you are giving them a particular job to do coming out of this meeting, and that you'll follow up with them later. And again, that's about having that relationship and give and take. And if you do get somebody who's surprisingly supportive, who, you know, didn't fit the stereotype that you expected when you walked in, you might actually, if you can build a relationship that's, you know, several meetings, and you can actually build up a relationship that is one where they'll call you on, you know, you can become sort of their community expert on an issue. And if they know that they can trust you not to out them to Stephen Harper, for example, but to maintain a quiet but respectful relationship with them, you can actually build up a relationship where you'll become their go-to person in the community to say, well, how do folks think about this where you live? And that's particularly influential and valuable if you're able to build that up. So you're going to wrap up with that, saying this is what we've asked you to do. I'm going to call you in a week and see if that had a chance to follow through. You're going to note any information that you've promised, because sometimes that conversation develops into them asking you for more detail on a particular piece of it. And so you need to make sure you follow through on that. You're going to try and get a couple of pictures to send into the communications folks. And you are going to thank them for their time, even if it's not been a very good feeling meeting. Answer their questions honestly, be a good listener and ask good questions, but really try and keep the agenda focused on the issue that you came in for, and leave them with a short package of handouts. After the meeting then, you're going to have a conversation with folks that came in with you. How do you think it went? What do you think we achieved? Do you have any concerns? All those kinds of conversations. And mostly people will feel just really good that they've done something, because it does have a sense of accomplishment. Even if they didn't agree with anything, you know that you've done something to bring this issue forward that you care about. And then, yeah, I've already covered all of that stuff, the sending a thank you.
Joey, there's a comment here that maybe you could address.
Yes.
It says, tip, if you get a personal moment with a politician, ask about their life. It helps a ton in building relationships with your politicians. Questions like, are you growing a garden this year? Or are you going on vacation this year? What do you think about that?
I think that's totally fine. You know, they're human beings too, and you want them to know that you've recognized that. And, you know, I mean, you're not going to be prodding and prying, but you're looking for common ground with them on a whole range of issues, but it also includes that kind of personal aspect. I think there's, you know, in a sense, sometimes that's where they try and take you and keep you, is just chatting about personal stuff, and you've come with a mission. But if you're bumping into people, especially just to say, hey, I recognize you, and how's it going, and what's up, and, you know, lovely day, isn't it? All that kind of just being human with each other, I think, is totally fine.
Okay, great. And if anybody else has questions or comments, please do pop them into the chat box or the Q&A box.
Okay, so, okay, here we go. So a couple of tools I wanted to give you. One is called Spectrum of Allies. Again, it's going to be in the kit materials that we're sending you. I really like this from George Lakey. He does a lot of training for change. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can certainly Google tools or training for change, or Google George Lakey, and you're going to have a chance to see other kinds of tools that he provides. So this one is about basically making a fan or drawing out a fan and dividing it into some sections. And the idea, as it says at the banner across the top, is move them one step to the left. And so there are some people that are so far away from where you want to be in terms of this issue that you're just going to basically write them off. You're not going to spend your energy on them. So that's the ones on the far right of this fan, and you basically just isolate them. But everybody else, and you can actually write their names into these pieces of the pie. So write in the names of who's opposed but not active. You're using this for example, your city council. So people who, you can use this for a number of ways, but in this context, I would say that you would think about who's far away from your issue and who's really close to your issue. And you could also think about it as how you organize your chapter, for example, who's involved with your chapter, but you need to move them a little closer to being an activist in it. So the idea is that the spectrum gives you a tool to think about not having to move people from 100% opposed to 100% in favor, but how you nudge them towards your issues. So if you spend a little bit of time with each of those groups, you might be able to move them one space over. And if you had, say, 5 different pieces of the fan and move each group over by 2%, you've actually had a 10% gain in your movement. I just find it a very good visual clue for not feeling overwhelmed by the momentous task ahead of us, but to look at it again, broken down into bite-sized and achievable pieces, and it helps strategically to be able to move that forward. This one's called power mapping, and it's just another way of figuring out who it is you're going to meet with, and what the other influences are on them. So if I'm meeting, let's just presume that I'm meeting with the Prime Minister, Trudeau, which is very, very unlikely, but you would put Trudeau's name in the middle, and then you would fill in or circle in each of those 4 quadrants which have the biggest influence on him. And so media has obviously a pretty big piece. Voters have a very big piece. Down below, the personal influences, family, friends, church, inner circle. Who do you think has the most impact on what he cares about? And I've been involved with Industrial Areas Foundation model organizing, which is came out of Saul Alinsky and the 1940 Chicago experience, where there had been a meat packer strike that had gone on for a long time without any kind of conclusion. It wasn't going anywhere. And Saul Alinsky came and did kind of an objective analysis and saw that discovered that the owner of the meatpacking plant was a devout Catholic. And so he arranged a rally for the president of the union and the archdiocese to be on the same stage, both putting out the ethical question of how could you have these people who are already in poverty conditions being locked out by their employer and not being able to achieve a fair collective agreement. And after being a very protracted strike, this was resolved in a matter of days after determining the influence, because you now had the faith leader of that company owner telling him essentially in a very public way that he better come into line because he was, what his actions were contrary to the belief system that he claim to hold. So that's just one example, but looking at who else has influence over this person and moving them in the right direction, because this can help inform the approach that you take when you do get in to meet with them. And then the final tool is a web analysis, and this is just another variation on the same thing. It's you may prefer this style format, but it's more like we did this a couple of weeks ago with the council chapter call in terms of you as an individual in the middle and who are the interactions that you have around you. This is a different twist on it, which puts, it says opponent, but you could put the politician you're trying to persuade in the middle, and then looking at, again, what are the interactions around them and who are the influences around them. So use these as they are useful to you. They're just examples of many, many kinds of tools that are available on the internet that help you plot out where you want to take these things. So, how are we doing for time? We are at 4:08. So I'm just going to very quickly then just tell you a bit about how we in Vancouver used these organizing and lobbying techniques to get Vancouver to become a blue community a few months ago. So we started way back in September, figuring out what is it we were going to do. We had a couple of group meetings with people involved with the Council of Canadians and our allies to work out a plan, and we chose our champion. And this is something I didn't mention earlier, but when you're looking at a group of politicians, one of the first things you're going to do is think, well, who's already on our side and who can help us navigate this? So City of Vancouver, the woman who is second from the left is Councillor Christine Boyle, and she has been involved with social justice work since she was probably a kid. And so we identified her as somebody who could navigate and help us navigate moving forward on becoming a blue community in Vancouver. To see what this question is. Vancouver Council has 8 women and 3 men. Has, I think there's more coming. I'll come back to it. So we talked to Christine and said, you know, here's something we'd like to work on with you. She said, terrific. We then asked her to introduce the idea to the mayor, who is Kennedy Stewart, standing in the middle there. He then asked Christine and Councillor Pete Fry, who is 4th from the left, to basically steward this issue forward. And they arranged for a meeting where they invited every member of City Council to meet with our lobby group to initiate this issue. We then had a meeting where we figured, well, who else do we take with us? So we brought with us the president of the Vancouver District Labour Council, who had used the time in between being invited in this meeting to take a resolution to the Labour Council that was adopted in support of asking Vancouver to become a blue community. So we had that also with us. We had the representative of the QP locals, because those are the people who work with the waterworks system and the distribution and the safety, and so QP was there to support us. We had the Secretary Treasurer of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, because water and Indigenous rights have been very dovetailed issues, and certainly the work of the Council of Canadians has been important, and that they subsequently passed a motion to support the Council of Canadians campaign on this generally. And we took 2 members of the local chapter, and because Maud Barlow was in Vancouver for a book launch, we had her with us. And I mean, that was a big advantage, obviously, in terms of getting a large interest from the political base as well. So we got the meeting, we scheduled it, we had our materials put together, we referred the staff of the councillors to the website so that they could have some prepared information and know what the issues were going to be. We had a resolution prepared that we specifically asked them to consider. And we went in knowing it was going to be a friendly meeting, but we also, when we got there, we didn't know who else besides Councillor Boyle and Fry would be there, but we were delighted that in addition to them, we had a total of 5 politicians show up, representing the Green Party in COPE, which is a Vancouver-based left party, and everybody was represented except for the right-wing party, which is called the NPA, Nonpartisan Association. So 5 councillors representing 3 parties. And the other thing that's important here is that Vancouver doesn't have wards. It's an at-large system, so every politician represents the whole city. So we had them a very good meeting. We worked out a game plan. They identified some of the challenges that they thought there might be in terms of getting this passed. We had one of our people work with their staff people to rework the motion in a way that they knew would satisfy those concerns, but also didn't compromise our policy directive from the Council of Canadians. And we then had a follow-up meeting, and subsequently it went to a vote, and it was passed with 3 nonpartisan association right-wing party people abstaining, but nobody voted against it. We also had letters to the editor, and we, through the Council of Canadians, had 300 letters through the activist space, through a call to activists and members. We know that 300 plus letters were delivered to every one of these politicians in advance of the vote. So I think that's what neutralized the people who might have voted no otherwise, just chose to abstain instead. And then we celebrate. Now, COVID happened just before we were going to have, we had scheduled a media release, so that's on hold. But these folks are going to get certificates and an opportunity for us to applaud them for having made the right decision that lined up. So the elements of this were choosing a champion, figuring out what the issue were, having a very specific ask, one that we knew was achievable, one that fit in with a broader campaign, and to make them feel really good about what they were doing and felt like they were serving the citizens that voted them in supporting this issue. And I think that's as much as I need to say. That was just kind of a case study to put it in action and just see if there's any further questions and if you have any thoughts about how this went that you'd like to share with me.
Joey, Roy finished his question, and that was, he was talking about the perceived gender, representation in the council, and said, has this configuration of the council worked for the better?
I would say yes. I would say that my experience is that in virtually every place I've ever been where it's dominated by women or people who take the approach, that there's a more collaborative approach. There's less testosterone-driven kind of animosity or competitiveness. And there's one person on this council who's just really, really difficult, but they just sort of tolerate. She just takes up an amazing amount of oxygen on this council. But nonetheless, I would say, yeah, I think that there is a sense of more working together across party lines as well. And one of the folks who voted for it actually had been a member of NPA. Actually, I should say that when we met with them, it was all parties were represented, including the right-wing NPA. And she subsequently left that party because she's a lesbian, and they had taken a pretty homophobic position on something, and she just didn't see a place for herself there anymore. But she's still a very effective politician.
So I guess we could open it up for questions. You can use the raise hand function to ask questions. That's kind of, should be up near the upper right of your screen or along the bottom there. You can also pop a question into the chat box, which you'll find the icon for that on the bottom, or the Q&A box, which is right to the left of the chat box. So let's see, we've got one question here from Penny Tilby. Penny, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's not so much a question as an observation, Joey. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. But what it makes me feel like is we need to often look at that way of approaching things. When we look at the large issues that the council deals with, because, you know, it's trade, it's water, it's health, and it's breaking it down to the manageable bits that a chapter can deal with. And I think that's often the frustration that I felt in the chapter experience has been, how do we take those issues and break them down into things that are truly meaningful actions at the local level? And that's a big challenge. Like, what are the bits that, you know, if it's something like trade, it's international, where does it filter down to at the various levels that we can have some control over, perhaps, you know, municipal or provincial? And that's where I'd be looking for the most support, I guess, from the national office and research people and local regional organizers in helping us achieve that. Because everything you say just makes so much sense about that's how you go about it, how you find your allies, all the rest of it. but it's often where we're stuck.
So a couple of things. One is the local level includes your MPs. So you have the opportunity to take those really big broad brush issues to your MPs when they are home, when Parliament's not sitting and that they have time in their constituencies. They expect to be lobbied, and they should hear our voices along with the others that they're meeting with. So you can still stay at that high level with the big picture issues and the large scale issues, but you can also say, well, so what does trade mean in my community? So one, I recall when we did got City of Vancouver to become a living wage employer, I know at one point trade deals were looking at labor rates of pay as being an issue that they would say would interfere with the competitive edge if wages were allowed to rise in a particular community. So they have a very expansive view on something that we would see as a very local issue. So I think we can help you as the board at the council, as well as through AJ, to figure out how to nuance what seems like a pretty overwhelming issue to a specific ask in a community. And I think maybe we haven't always been that helpful in this regard and left it to you folks to try and grapple with the really big issues and how do you put that into a community perspective with a local politician. What I would say is maybe as a board member, I would try and be a little more thoughtful about looking for those pieces that we can offer up to you at the chapter level.
Thank you, Joey.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Penny, do you have anything else to follow up with on that?
No, I appreciate that. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And there was a comment there that says from Lynn saying, could you talk more about letters that were written and how you managed that? Did you say that 300 letters went to each counselor? And a thank you, Joey.
Yeah, so this was done through an action from VBUI in the national office of the Council of Canadians. And so it wasn't individual handwritten letters. It was people had the opportunity through the website to sign on to a letter that had been written, and then many also wrote individual letters. So that would be a huge, huge accomplishment to think about 300 individuals sitting down and writing a letter or an email to their counselor. But through that mechanism, we were able to have the standardized letter delivered on behalf of 300 individuals to each counselor.
Okay, great. And then Mary says, this was extremely useful, Joey. Thank you very much for all the detail and for the promise notes on your webinar. And yeah, I'll be sending those out to everyone who registered. And then I see, Penny, did you have something to follow up with?
So if anybody finds any typos, let me know, because I didn't actually proofread it cover to cover. But it's about 10 pages long in total.
Okay, and Penny.
No copywriting. I was just going to say no copywriting. Anything I prepare, I'm happy to see shared.
Okay, and Yvonne, let's go ahead. Penny, your hand's still up, and I had put it down earlier, so jump in if you have anything to say, but otherwise we'll move on to Yvonne for now.
Yeah, thanks, Joey. I really enjoyed that. My question is, you talked about a standardized letter that people signed onto and it got sent. Is that as effective as individual letters? There's all this kind of back and forth about whether standardized things really have that much clout.
They have clout. They don't have as much clout. So, you know, I always say a politician, or I always say a petition. The most value of a petition is not to convince a politician of the contents of that petition. It's the value of engaging with people to get them to have a conversation with you as they sign your petition, to have community engagement and a sense of opportunity to build a bit of activism and knowledge around the issue. But delivering those to the politician, unless you're able to get a good media thing, you know, saying, you know, we've got 13,000 pages of signatures here, and to be able to do a media activity around it. It's really the value of it is the activity that it provides, not the actual petition. And I would say that all of these things are on a scale. You know, we talk about clickoctomy. I can never say it. You know, people clicking for democracy. It's quick and it's easy, so the politicians will know that it didn't take as much energy or work or thought as somebody sitting down and typing an email. But it does let them know that whoever is speaking to them is not doing it in a vacuum. And so it still has value.
Anybody else with any questions or comments? Or last things to follow up on? Okay, Yvonne, go ahead. You'll just have to unmute. There you go.
Yeah. No, I was just one last thing. When you were talking about earlier, you asked if anybody been involved in any lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we did do in the St. John's chapter, first when I was getting involved, was we had an afternoon letter writing campaign on pharmacare. And we did it in a community room at a supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a really broad spectrum. We had contacted other people beforehand, but we had a really broad spectrum of people come, from people who were barely literate
Mm-hmm.
and could write but were able to articulate about why they wanted pharmacare, right down to a PhD and somebody who'd been involved in politics who would come in to write letters, which were a very different kind.
Yep.
And then we put them all together and sent them to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health at the time, etc. And I think that can be effective lobbying, but I don't know if that's something you can do in a chapter without having to organize necessarily a meeting with politicians.
It's really easy to organize, and it's a terrific way of doing it, because I do agree with you that it's a much more effective way than people just signing on to something that's on the web. What we used to do at the Labor Council when I was the president was we'd provide people with, we'd put on the screen like 5 bullet points on an issue so that they were having to put it in their own words after a presentation. And then, so here's the things that your letter could capture. And we made sure that there was like a variety of stationery and different sizes of envelopes. And, but we, that way it didn't look like it was so constructed, but it really, you could end up in 15 minutes having, 100 letters written in people's own hand. And we do know that has an impact. So I'm glad to hear you did that, Yvonne, because it's a very effective way of organizing. And people feel good about it, right? Like it's social, and they feel like they've made an accomplishment. It's not just being a bystander, it's actually doing something. So it's a really great way of doing it.
Thanks, Yvonne. We have Amanda in the Q&A box with a question. When you find yourself in a follow-up phase, what is the most appropriate way of bringing up communication? A phone call, trying to find them in person, social media tagging them in a video, blog?
Right. It can be hard. I would say that I would normally have communication with the constituency assistant or the political staff person, and the politician would say, follow up with so-and-so here. And so I would start emailing them after, if we've said that it would probably be a week or two, then I'd mark that on my calendar and follow up with them. You're not trying to shame them necessarily. You're just trying to, make sure that the commitment that you received is not ignored. And so you might have to be a bit of a pest on it, but and you may never get it. You may never get it. But people will say things in the meeting, and even if they fully are sincere, circumstances could change around that. But it's just the point is really that you're looking for more than having laid a seed in their thinking, but to also try and engage them in something that you have a chance to follow up with them later and a reason to. So you may never get it though. So
thanks, Joey. We're at 4:27, so I think that brings us pretty much to the end of our time together. I will be sending out those notes to everyone, and also this has been recorded. So if you need access for a friend or community member or comrade to this webinar, we do have it recorded, so it's there for you if you need it. Joey, did you have any parting words?
No, I'm glad that the amount of time seemed to be the right amount, and it was fun to do and really nice to chat with all of you. So I hope you found it useful, and if you want to send me off an email through AJ of any further questions that might come up later, or feedback on it, stuff you found particularly useful or not, that would be also used to integrate into it for future. Thanks so much for your time, everybody. Can't hear you, AJ.
Oops. No matter how many Zoom calls, I'm still going to talk on mute.
Right.
I'm just saying that thank you so much for all of your time, Joey. And anyone who would like to reach me or reach Joey through me, you can reach me at aklein, AKLEIN, @canadians.org. And I'll be emailing you all in a moment anyhow with those notes. So thanks again, Joey, for all your time and all this great information. And thanks everyone for attending. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.